Hello, everyone, and welcome to the latest session of Navozyme's Navigating New Waves webinar series. I'm Isabel, and it's a pleasure to have you with us today. For those who may be new to Navozyme, we develop cutting-edge technology solutions that streamline key maritime processes related to port call optimization, seafarers' credentials, and bunkering. And our goal is to transform the maritime industry, improve lives, and accelerate the sector decarbonization. Today, we're delighted to welcome Mr. Ørnulf Rødseth, a member of the leadership team at Dynaport, where he leads Work Package 5 on digital interface standards. He also serves as the Director Maritime at ITS Norway. And joining him in conversation will be Borwankar, Navozyme's co-founder and Chief Executive. Together, they will explore the important work being carried out by Dynaport and discuss how digital standards are shaping the future of maritime operations. Before we begin, please remember you can participate in today's session by submitting your questions via the Q&A chat box. Without further ado, I'm pleased to hand over to Anjaney and Ørnulf.
Thank you so much, Isabel. Thank you for that. And welcome to another series on this New Waves webinar that we've been conducting for some time. The objective of the series is to raise awareness on pertinent issues related to maritime. We've talked in previous occasions on big themes like decarbonization, the role of women in shipping, future talent, digitalization, AI, and its effects. And today is also going to be another very exciting session, very specific topic as well. And I'm delighted to have with me Ørnulf. I will introduce Ørnulf in a second, but welcome, Ørnulf. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
So Ørnulf is joining us from Norway, which brings some pleasant coolness to this session. I'm sitting in Barcelona. Outside my window, I can see the Sagrada Familia, and it's scorching hot. Okay, I don't know what the temperature is, but it feels like literally you're in a sauna right now. Okay, so for all the viewers and listeners who are there in different parts of the world, again, we really appreciate your questions, comments, and participation. This is a free resource. We like to do this because we like to engage with the wider community. So please, in this session, as on previous occasions, feel free to drop in your questions. I will talk about the structure, and we will take all your questions as far as possible. In the list of registrations that I was going through earlier, there are literally people from all over the world, including far-off places from this point of view, like Japan and the US. So if you are connected, again, thank you and welcome to this session. So let me frame the session and let me also talk about the format, and then we'll jump right in. So like I mentioned, the Sagrada Familia, that Antonio Gaudí had a vision, and it's still work in progress, by the way. Okay, so now we have an expected completion day. For those not familiar with the Sagrada Familia, it's a magnificent monument from this visionary architect, and he died long time before the entire thing was completed. Okay, but it's definitely one of the most beautiful structures in the world. And why I'm talking about that is because this topic today of port call optimization and the vision for just-in-time port calls has been around for quite some time, right? So I have met Ørnulf actually on 2 occasions in a group, in a working group, the PCO, the Port Call Optimization Working Group in Rotterdam, and then this year earlier in Valencia. And I wanted to raise awareness on this topic and also learn myself, what exactly is going on, because definitely the gains are tremendous, but it's a big challenge. And Dynaport, which we're going to know more about, is really a consortium of leading organizations that has come together to make this vision possible, right? So we'll learn much more about that. But first, let me properly introduce Ørnulf and actually welcome him. So Ørnulf Rødseth, we're going to call him Ørnulf just to be easy for me. And if you don't like that, then you try pronouncing my name, and then we'll see how this goes. Okay. So Ørnulf, again, you're the Director of Maritime for ITS Norway, and you're also part of this PCO working group for quite some time. You've been a pioneer also, actually, from a technical point of view, really on autonomous ships and on creating standards, right? So welcome, and I'm really honored and delighted to have you on this session. So for the viewers, it would be great if you start by a brief introduction of yourself. So Ørnulf, tell me a little bit about your role in ITS Norway, and then how did you actually join Dynaport? What is the motivation for that? Give us some context here.
Yes, I hope I'm online. I came to ITS Norway from a research institute called Intensifies Norway, quite big, not-for-profit, about 2.5 years ago. And I was a senior scientist there. And I guess senior means that I'm getting old. So I got my master's degree in '83 in software and electronic engineering, and worked with various things, but started with maritime digitalization and automation around 1995. I worked with that also in the industry for a couple of years. And then in 2012, we started with autonomous ships here in Norway. But as autonomous ships develop, we can come back to that if you like. But the last few years, I've been more involved in what you mentioned, digitalization and making shipping more effective. And the background is, of course, the need for greenhouse gas reduction and electrification and all that stuff. So I have a long track record here. I'm working in ISO, international standards, in IC, also attending IMO meetings, and as you say, the port call optimization. And currently my major project is Dynaport, although I'm still working with the autonomous ships. Very briefly.
Yeah, no, that's a fantastic context. So again, really lucky to have you participate and share your experience. I didn't realize you've got like 30 plus years of experience working on these related topics. I'm not going to go into age, but you didn't seem, that old for lack of a better word. And again, I think here it's important to highlight that the work that's ongoing in these various projects, there needs to be some standardization and coordination, right? Because everyone has very good intentions, but then at the end, we've seen also what happens with chargers all over the world with the phones, and imagine those kinds of things happening with ships in different ports in the world, right? There's already enough complexity. So I think the work of the standardization is to reduce this entropy, reduce this chaos, and bring it a little bit more unified. Very difficult for a global kind of organization where you can't just mandate things straight away. So we'll talk about that. I'm very interested not only how you set those technical standards, but also how do you influence the people to kind of move in that direction, right? The change that happens. Maybe you can talk a bit about Dynaport itself, like the origin, the funding that it has, some of the key partners, right? You've mentioned SINTEF, obviously, which is very important, but there are many others also involved. So tell us a little bit about the origin of Dynaport, your involvement particularly. That would be very interesting for us.
Yeah, it's an interesting point. As I mentioned, energy efficiency is the thing we are looking at in Dynaport. And the main theme in Dynaport is basically voyage optimization, actually. And just to put in a few words on that, I mean, there's a lot of talk about using ammonia and hydrogen and stuff like that for ships to reduce emissions. But these fuels will be very expensive, very difficult to get hold of. So you, in any case, have to look at the energy efficiency. And there you have this issue of voyage optimization, reducing speed, reducing emissions, and also reducing idle time in ports. And there we are into this port call optimization. So as mentioned, Dynaport is a EU-funded project under the Horizon 2020 program. We have a sister project called Mission. And between us, we have quite a lot of the big ports in Europe, together with significant shipping operators. And briefly, you can say that the Mission project, our sister project, they focus more on port call optimization, optimizing the processes in the port, while Mission, in principle, Dynaport is mostly concerned about the voyage optimization, and that's because Norway is not a big port nation, but we have a lot of shipping. But between us, we think we can get quite good results. And as I said, also the cooperation with the port call optimization network is very important. It's kind of a common baseline. So that's the main reason why we are working with this project. And of course, in the EU, the focus on greenhouse gas emissions, energy efficiency, all that is very high, also in the maritime sector. And I mean, we cannot make do without ships. 70 to 80% of imports to Europe is by ship. In Norway, internal transport in our country is 40-50% by ships. So it's an extremely important sector, and a sector that can give a lot of benefits to the society if you use it correctly. But it's getting a bit old-fashioned, and then we are getting into this issue of more automation, which requires more digitalization, and overcoming some of these obstacles in close to 200 years old business model.
Yeah. So also just a few more specifics here. I'm actually got the Dynaport website open in front of me, and I see there are almost a dozen different organizations, right? From R&D and university-related organizations, 6 ports here, including Barcelona, Rotterdam,
Yep.
and Gothenburg, Sines, Aalborg, Harwich. So quite significant. Some shipping companies and equipment software service providers. And then there's you on the standardization side of things, right? Leading those initiatives there. So that's a little bit the consortium. What's the timeline for this funding, and the like how much funding have they received? Just to give a little bit of scale for the people listening.
I think if I remember correctly, the budget is a bit above 8 million euros for the project. The funding is around 7.5. Mission is about the same. So it's not the big EU projects we are talking about, but fairly sizable, I'd say.
Right.
So that's that. And we started at the end of 24 and will run until end of 26. So we are about halfway now.
Okay, yeah, that's great to know the perspective. But again, for this very specific area between Mission and Dynaport, we're talking of about 15 million euros dedicated specifically to, bring out some of these outcomes. So that's brilliant. And again, just to recap, and my understanding here also, we'll talk more specifically how you see just in time. But obviously, the idea here is today ships come from all over the world to the various ports. Let's take the very traditional side of things. So they arrive, and then many services are required for the ship, right? And I like to always go to first principles and remind the audience also that why do the ships even come to the port, right, in the first place? And this may change going in the future, but ships come to the port. And again, we're talking of commercial ships right now. So basically cargo, loading, unloading, that's one obvious one. Then you have the people. So you may have crew changes, you may have fueling, bunkering or provisions for food, etc. Sometimes repairs. And more or less that covers, I would say, the biggest range of reasons why a ship comes to a port. Now, I just mentioned 5 items. But when you go down any one of these items, let's look at bunkering, for example, okay, fueling of ships, where we are also involved as a company in Navozyme. And that's why we are part of the port call optimization group. But what you see here is you have a bunker barge, So you have the captain of the barge who needs to know when the ship is coming. You need the suppliers. So the contract is made with the company that buys the fuel, and somehow they have to have the right kind of fuel on the barge. Then the port needs to know that the ship is coming so that they can give the berth or the anchorage, depending on what you're trying to do. Often you require a pilot, and so on and so on. So what I'm trying to say is, though the first principles are just very simple, 5 reasons, when you go into the specifics, the number of stakeholders involved and the kind of information that they need to be able to deliver those services is where the details lie and the complexity arrives, right? And so what happens typically, and again, today also in Barcelona, you look out of the window and there are some 20, 30 ships waiting there. I came from Singapore about a week ago, and there are literally hundreds of ships out there, right? And of course, they're doing certain activities, but often what you mentioned earlier, it's idle time. They're just hanging around there because someone has to get the information, coordinate the things, and then the activity can begin, right? And let's not forget, this is a highly regulated industry. So you need to comply with all the checks and measures for safety reasons. Anything goes wrong, you're in the newspaper. It's all over the place, right? And completely undermines the decarbonization efforts, because often, you can have some fuel spills or so what we're talking about really from an efficiency perspective also has to take into account all these regulatory requirements and the safety measures, right? That's kind of a prerequisite. So we have to frame this conversation with the fact that it is not just about making it as optimal as possible. It's within the constraints of the industry, which is highly regulated and quite complex, right? Okay. But the gains are tremendous. So you mentioned energy. So we're talking literally, when you save time, you're basically waiting less and less fuel burned. And again, we're talking of some of these large ships, literally, hundreds of tons of fuel burnt every day. And even while waiting, there's tens of tons of fuel burnt. Now, fuel saved is also cost saved, right? So money talks. So the ship owners, etc., everyone's listening. But last but not the least, there's also regulations. At least in Europe, very strict regulations on reporting and taxation for carbon emissions. So or rather greenhouse gas emissions. So very, very good reasons why just in time would make a lot of sense. But then there is tradition and convention. And the tradition and convention is the ship comes, then it puts its notice of readiness. After that, everything starts. So it's not, just in time. It's actually first come, first served, come in and wait, all that. So we're not talking only of technical complexities. We're also talking of commercial complexities and traditional kind of legacy procedures here also at play. We won't be able to address all of this in this webinar. I just want to make sure. So we may have to do more stuff along these lines. But Ørnulf is going to shed a lot of light on these matters, okay? But Ørnulf, my question now to you, and I'm going to now, after this, keep my questions really short. But I wanted to frame it for the audience if they're just tuning in, right, on what is this. So, but tell us how you see just in time. How would you define that? And also from Dynamo's perspective, if there's anything you want to highlight on that matter.
Yeah, and I think just adding to your description of the picture, I think one of the main problems we have is also that there are different commercial entities that are doing this, and they don't necessarily have the same interests. And a typical problem is this split incentive issue between charter and ship owner. Because in most contracts, the charter is paying for the fuel, and the ship owner has to make sure that the ship arrives on time. So there's absolutely no interest for the ship owner to slow down. Contrary, if he slows down and gets late into the port, he will have to pay the charter. And the fuel, at least today, is significantly less than the hire for the ship. So there are also quite complicated issues in the contractual regime here, and also in the organizational, and we see it very clearly in the port, because the owner or the charter agrees with the terminal when to arrive. But the port authority has to also be involved in this. But the port authority, as you say, is normally a first come, first serve. So it's a very complex picture. So for that reason, about the port call optimization network and Dynaport is also going into investigations into the contractual regimes. So just to mention that. But as you say, just in time is for the ship owner, which in a sense is what Dynaport is mostly concerned about. The ship owner, at least many of them are interested in saving fuel. But to save fuel, you have to optimize your voyage to arrive as closely to the agreed or the planned arrival time, as we call it. And that requires that you can get an agreement both with the terminal, the port, and other service providers, as you say, that this is the time when you will be allowed into the port. And that's basically the problem we are trying to solve. How to exchange information between the ship and the port and internally in the port so that everybody can agree on when the ship arrives. And just to complicate things, you have different trades. And the big container liners is not the problem. They typically call on one terminal. A Maersk ship calls on the Maersk terminal. And the terminal has a good connection with the port authorities, so they manage that. But the big container liners is less than 5% of the number of ships in the world. Most of it is spot charter. We have a lot of parcel tankers that has to call on the different terminals, short sea shipping feeders, which have to pick up terminals in a lot of pick up containers or deliver containers in a lot of terminals. So I think what you said, that getting the information at time, in time, and to the correct stakeholders is one of the things that is critical here. In addition, of course, to adjust the business model so that it's actually possible to cooperate. There's also competition between the terminals, and this willingness to share data is also an issue here, of course, because there's commercial interest in some of this data. So it is not easy. Just making the processes, and as you said initially, even if you have the processes relatively aligned, we still have to have standards, so that ships calling on 5,000 to 7,000 different ports in the world, they don't have to relate to 5,000 to 7,000 different ways of providing this information. So it's a major challenge here, I'd say.
And that's why people like you are involved. So we are in good hands, but I think what we've done so far is really highlight the challenge ahead of us, no? Because otherwise it's like, yeah, the concept is straightforward, so why not? Why don't we actually do it? No? And often comparisons are made with the airline industry, right? However, the airline industry is not the same as the shipping industry for various reasons that we can go into. And maybe later you can touch upon this. So just to summarize what you've said so far, one, I think you've highlighted a very important point, that there's a mismatch in incentives between the charterer and the ship owner. And these are finally the people who are paying the party, right? I always remind people that port and all those services are great, but the one who finally puts the bill is one of these guys, right? And imagine if their incentives are not aligned, right? And so I found that very interesting. So while there is good intent, etc., at the end, nobody wants to lose money or throw away money, right? So I'm happy to learn actually that Dynaport is doing some work in that direction. I was not aware of that, but that's super, right? So that's one. The second thing itself that you said is, let's say those incentives are there, etc. Then you still have the challenge of agreeing on the terms and processes and the data standards across the globe, because and this in Navozyme we have also faced this also just within Spain itself, right? So we work in about 19 ports right now, helping with port call optimization from the point of view of smoothing processes for ship agents and the ship coming in and out, right? But what we see, let's take the crew list, for example. Okay, a simple thing like that, which has many, like the IMO crew list, etc., etc. And you would imagine everyone is supposed to just use that. But then you have the local nuances and flavors, and even one friction point at the end means that you don't have a port call done, right? So it's not about solving it 99%. You have to get it all right, though you can get big wins, I think, from the procedure. So what are your thoughts here, and then move into the standardization challenge as well?
It's an interesting point, this, and I'd say it's a kind of two answers to this call it question. We are active also in IMO. IMO is developing what they call the IMO compendium, which you should really have a close look at. And that seems to be a kind of focus point now for at least agreeing on the semantic meaning of data, for instance, crew list. We still have to convert the IMO compendium to technical standards like ISO or EDIFACT or whatever. But the IMO compendium is also developed in cooperation with ISO, UNECE, which is responsible for EDIFACT and stuff like that, and the World Customs Organization, with the commitment to also align our technical standards with this data model. So, and we see a big and growing interest in the industry and organizational structure in the maritime sector that they really look to the IMO compendium to try to harmonize the individual standards. And the point is also that we can live with a few technical standards. You can use EDIFACT if you want to do that, and you can use the ISO standards in parallel, but we don't want 5,000 standards. So there's something we have to think about there. And if you look at to the container industry, for instance, which is already fairly digitalized, they have a lot of investment in existing specifications, for instance, from DCSA or UNECE or whatever. And we shouldn't try to overrun what's already working, but we have to work together to find a common solution. So at least I think what's going on around the IMO compendium is a very interesting development as a focal point for reaching a kind of consensus on the way forward. The other point is, you may, or of course you know Ben van Scheppenzel, which is kind of the head guy in the port call optimization. And his idea is that, okay, we won't try to solve everything at once. We eat elephant piece at a time. So we start with something that we can agree on and then try to build on it. So I think that's also a very important point, that we shouldn't try to make a revolution here and change everything at once. But let's start with the simple stuff. For instance, how the ship reports its information into the port. And then whatever goes on in the port, we don't have to worry too much about at this point. But if we get that interface standardized in a very simple way, at least we have the communication between the ship and the port, which helps a lot, I think. But it is extremely complicated, the whole thing.
Yeah. No, you made a very good point that there is the IMO compendium. And actually, for the listeners also, quite some time back, it's been over a year, I was fortunate to have Julian Abril, who's the head of the FAL committee. And he, of course, told how the IMO works, what's the FAL's role. But also he mentioned the IMO compendium as being the Bible, really, on which all other things should be based, right? And you've actually also highlighted the importance of that. So for us, luckily in Navozyme, we learned about this quite some time back. And our solutions have been built keeping that IMO compendium, really, the data fields, the naming, the nomenclature, etc., and whatever else comes as the basis for building solutions. And again, for those who are looking at building solutions, software providers, etc., it's really important that you take a look at that, right? Especially if you're trying to address a global industry. So point very well made. What's the like tell me a little bit about how does the IMO compendium, like you mentioned, interact actually with ISO or other technical, how does that non-technical business process translate into a technical standard? And that's really where you come in quite a lot. So help me understand that process. Also, I think they'll be very valuable for the audience.
Yeah, exactly. This cooperation started in 2019, I think, between World Customs Organization and UNEC and ISO and IMO. And the recognition at that time was based on the work with the maritime single window, where we saw that EDIFACT was already being used. ISO has a specification, and World Customs Organization is responsible for the kind of standardization between the authorities, the customs organizations and others. And we operated with different data models at that time. So the agreement that was signed by our bosses in Geneva and elsewhere was that, okay, we will cooperate to develop a common semantic model, and then we will commit to making our specific standards compatible with that. And we also publish translation tables. So in principle, it should be quite easy to send your manifest or bill of lading or whatever in EDIFACT and combine it with the ISO crew list or whatever. This call it early arrival notification, stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
And since then, we also have other standards organizations that are starting to look at this. DCSA, for instance, have been participating. I don't think they are fully compliant yet, but they are at least interested in doing it. Also, the nautical standards, which is electronic charts and stuff like that, is also at least looking at this to try to harmonize the part of the nautical. For instance, where is a bollard? And how do you identify bollard or a mooring, other mooring position? So it's a lot of interesting developments, but this is work underway and it will take several years. But it's, as I said, the compendium is really central in as I said, as a focus point for development by the different organizations, because there are different organizations. There are so many processes around a ship call arrival that you will have to need to relate to different organizations and different standards. But harmonization between the standards is essential.
Yeah, so the compendium is a very big step already done. Of course, work in progress constantly, but you can go to the IMO site and you can actually see the compendium, all the different data fields, their nomenclature, etc., what it means, the definitions, all that is there. So it's so while that is a big step forward, at least as a practitioner, somebody who's running a business trying to help and really scale up to all ports in the world, the challenge we see is that is firstly the awareness is not there, that there is something like that, right? So this is why also these kinds of webinars, etc., may be a small drop in the ocean, but it can help. And the other thing is really, in certain specific types of trade. So for example, you mentioned container shipping, quite right, and it's basically the liner business, which is actually much more predictable, and often they control the terminals, etc. Especially the large lines. There's a lot of optimization already, but it's just 5%. No, it's so it's really the tip of the iceberg. And sometimes I notice that we are, some groups may be trying to extrapolate from that to all the other, and it doesn't work like that, right? It just doesn't work. So the tram shipping, and you mentioned that. So this is where the challenge comes in a lot, that while it is possible to get gains on something, to just say that that's the entire industry is a misnomer. And today I'm just looking at one of the comments that has come in. It's a question comment from Captain Stephen Thomas, who's a stalwart in the super yachting industry, right? Something that we also sometimes just ignore or forget. but they also have vessels, sometimes very large, significant vessels. And his question is a little bit about, ports like Barcelona, etc., also have these super yachts coming in, and they also have the same kind of weighting issue. Of course, commercial interest may be slightly different here, but so he's asking, like, is Dynaport taking that also into account, like what the super yachts are doing, etc., and would you like to do that?
Well, we are not specifically looking at it because you also have the problem that most of the super yachts are not IMO ships. Some of them are, but not all. So the legislative framework is a bit different. So I'm not a specialist, so I cannot say exactly how this works out. But from the comment that Stephen makes, I would say that in a sense it looks quite a bit like trap shipping. So there should be quite similar ways of handling super yachts as you handle spot charters.
Yeah, and the standardization would still apply, like the names, the nautical terms, for example, all that would still
absolutely
be very applicable. Yeah, so the work
absolutely
here, though it's not directly actually with the focus on super yachting, it does benefit the entire industry, right?
I would say so. As I said, the legislative framework may be a bit different, which have some impact on, say, reporting requirements, for instance. But otherwise, it should be applicable.
Right. So we have, time is just passing through. I'm just looking at the clock, and it's almost half an hour since we started, or 35 minutes actually. So let's dive a little bit deeper into the part that you're leading, the work package 5, which is the digital interface standards for digital port call. So tell us, what is your objective, where you are with that, and maybe any breakthroughs and challenges. Of course, are plenty, but maybe you can just update us on how are things there.
Yeah, as I said, in a sense, Dynaport is mostly concerned about the ship. And for the ship, it's extremely important, or let's say the shipping sector, because the ship may be represented by the manager or the owner or the charter. So it's a complex business in itself. But for the organizations that operate the ship, it's extremely important to get standards in place that are international and agreed on, because they call on different ports all over the world. Liner shipping is less problematic actually, because they have their own terminals, so they can do whatever they want. But for 95% of the shipping, they are really dependent on standards to get any way in efficient digitalization. It's too expensive if everything is different. So I would say that one of the things I'm mostly concerned about is consensus, international consensus, because a saying is that there's not a lack of standards actually. The problem is that we have too many. At least in Dynaport, I'm working in ISO with ISO 28005 series of standards. And I think what we have decided is that we want to be flexible. It's much more important to reach an agreement between the stakeholders on how we do it than pushing one specific specification. So we are developing ISO 28005 to have a technical solution. But what we have seen is that we will most likely have to modify it to fit whatever the stakeholders really want. A simple example is that for the technical savvy people, 28005 uses XML, which is one type of markup language, while most of the young people, they want something called JSON. So that's one of the things we have to look at, and there's a lot of stuff like that. But I think consensus is the essential thing. And to do that, you really have to have this type of webinars. You have to spread information, you have to discuss, and you have to be open about it and see where we can end up. So that's what we are looking for, and hopefully as soon as possible.
Yeah. So you gave a good example, XML or JSON, right? And you're right, JSON is more the popular one, no?
Yes.
So when you go about, obviously, let's not get too much into details here, but just out of curiosity, and so how does that actually? How do you weigh the pros and cons of XML versus JSON? And like you said, you at some point a standard really means that everyone is agreeing to use one, and it's a trade-off, right? So I mean, how do you get this international consensus? I think that's the big elephant in the room, right?
Yeah.
Where do you begin? So what is your experience like showing you? How do you begin getting that human consensus on agreeing, XML or JSON or any other such things that come up?
Yeah, we have started this, and as I said, I think actually the most important thing we are doing is through the port call optimization network, because it has a fairly good outreach among ports. Shipping operations, they are not too concerned about it. They just want to have one solution. It's the ports that has to agree on what solution. So we are still, this is still work in progress. We are working through the port call optimization. We are participating in webinars like this. We are participating in BIMCO IMO meetings and trying to get the different stakeholders to specify what they want and why. And then we have to take the discussion. It doesn't, okay, I'm a computer scientist, so I have some preferences from a scientific point of view. But in practical terms, it doesn't matter much. So we can manage with whatever, but we have to agree. And as you say, it's an elephant in the room, and you have to eat it piece by piece.
Yeah.
Or bite by bite.
Mm-hmm.
But
right.
I don't think it's possible to do it in any other way than discussing with people and trying to get some agreement. But I think that on the positive side, there is some movements. People are starting to discuss it. They are getting it onto the table. We are trying to find solutions both in IMO with specification, in ISO with technical standards, and among the stakeholders. So it's moving, but it's a long way to go.
Yeah.
It will not happen overnight.
Right. And the outcomes of this, so of course the goal is very promising, right? You want to, it's displayed on your website as well. So the energy savings, we're talking of maybe 10% savings, right? And remember, there are many other initiatives already going on the type of fuel, the type of engines, all that is, of course, very valid. But here we're talking of, even if you get nice fuel and all that, but if you are inefficient and not just in time, you're going to still have lots of friction and greenhouse gases, right? So that's what we are addressing here, the often invisible layer, which is quite important, quite difficult. What's the outcome looking like? Because you said it's just a couple of years or so to go before this project finishes. So let me frame it differently, this question. What would you be really proud of that Dynaport is able to achieve at the end of this, this project lifespan? And I know this is a big challenge. That's why I started with the Sagrada Familia, which is not yet finished, right? But it's a beautiful thing to happen. So for you, what would you be proud of?
That we have made some concrete progress. I think that's as far as we can take it. As I mentioned, I've been working with digitalization in the maritime sector since 1995, and these issues, they have actually come up and up again. And data standards for maritime single windows, I think the first time I was working with that was in 2005, and we are still not at the point where we have standards, common standards. So we just have to recognize that we cannot push it. We have to take it gradually and piece by piece, I think. And what we are aiming for on a concrete level is to try to at least get the standard for communication between the ship and the port.
And what is that standard looking like at this point?
The ISO standard is ready, and it's a bit too complicated, I think, as it stands now. And as I said, we may have to change from XML to JSON to satisfy people. But basically, I think that is a good starting point. So we are still sticking to that.
And the work that's going on in Dynaport is really putting these, let's say, proof of concepts out there, testing it, bringing it up again, having lots of feedback. And once that is done, your recommendations will go to the IMO, I guess, right? That's how it works?
Yeah, I think probably we will do that. And we haven't talked about this, but it's a fairly complicated thing because you also have to think about identity registers, authentication, encryption, and stuff like that, which is a totally different issue, which also is fairly complicated. But these are the issues we hope we will have some concrete results that can be presented to IMO in probably 27 at the FAL.
Yeah.
51.
Understand.
So,
so it's a long process, but again, it's work in the right direction. So I'm now, sorry, finish what you're saying.
No, as you say, we see progress, and we are hopeful still.
Yeah, super. So, this has to be a very optimistic group. So PCO can also be port call optimistic group because if you're not, you're going to be in trouble. So I'm looking at the time, and also some more questions, comments have come in. And again, whoever's listening, or please, this is the time to not feel shy and put in your questions. Even comments, we're welcome. We're learning from everyone out here. So Captain Stephen Thomas has actually brought in some information saying that the super yachts, most of them are over 500 gross ton, which means they're nearly all IMO, right? So again, he's of course persuading all of us to also not forget the super yachting industry, right? And we've seen that much of the work here is actually going to be applicable to them as well.
Yeah, particularly for those who are IMO ships and under this legislation, it will be very similar to spot charter, actually.
Perfect. Then Jaco Woerspik is also making a very good point. He's talking like we've actually focused on the ship side and really from the vessel perspective. But what he's saying is in the hinterland, there's a lot of transportation that needs to be synchronized, right? And whether we have any views on that on the just-in-time arrival.
He's quite right.
Absolutely good point. Yeah.
But and we are looking into it. Jaco is also a member of the Dynaport team, and he is always pushing this point. And there are others also, of course. I mean, the port is not there just for being a port. It is to transfer the goods from and to the customers in the hinterland. So we really have to think about that. But in my opinion, it's not the first priority and not where it's easiest to develop standards. And also, the hinterland transport is typically national, so you're not so dependent on the international standards, at least for the technical implementation. The IMO compendium and the UNECE multimodal transport model is important in this work to have the semantic compatibility, but it's more national problem in many senses.
Yeah. So thanks for those comments. We've got another comment coming in from Yasmin, who's also part of the group. So Yasmin is saying, great session. Thank you for your usual insightful presentation, Ørnulf. And she's speaking from the perspective of Asia Pacific, basically saying that, the PCO and other such initiatives are really practical and does not require millions of dollars in investment, as that do not work with the legacy systems in developing country ports. Yeah. So basically, keep the the systems in the developing countries also in mind. And again, all these initiatives are really keeping the global perspective in mind. That's where the challenge also lies, right? So sometimes the naming, the way things are done, the processes do vary. In Navozyme, we work a lot in the Philippines as well. We work, in Southeast Asia, and yeah, it's quite different. Sometimes I'd say it's more advanced. I'm not completely like the legacy system problem, maybe less sometimes in some of these places because they just adopt a modern system. It is going forward, but it's a point well made. Any comments you have on this?
It's a very good comment. I have this concept of less developed shipping, which could apply to some of the developing countries, but we see it also in Europe that, for instance, inland shipping, you have small companies with little capital investments. And also in Norway, we have a fleet of coastal bulkers, for instance, that doesn't have the money and the resources to really invest in this stuff. And to get those, call it less developed shipping into this operation, again, we are very dependent on standards. Because standards is, of course, obvious that it will simplify stuff, but it's also necessary for driving innovation. You won't get the software industry to develop new applications, new software, new systems if you don't have standards, because it's too expensive. And once you get kind of a bigger volume out of this innovative industry, the prices will go down, and it will also be available for those with less money. So standards is, I think, in one sense, it's also maybe more important for driving innovation. If you have a standard system, you open up the ecosystem, or the whatever you want to call it, for new types of products, lower cost, easier entry, and so on and so forth. So that's, in my opinion, worth keeping in mind.
Yeah. No, Ørnulf, I'm actually very happy you mentioned the role of standards in innovation. And I can totally subscribe to that thought, because in Navozyme, what we're doing is actually, pioneering some of these solutions. We've won a lot of innovation related awards, but the challenge we face is, because there is no clear standard and there are pockets of standards in different regions, really for us to give the clients the perfect solution means we have to overinvest at this point.
Yep.
And okay, we are doing that, but it would be much easier. And also, I think it would be much more competitive in a nice way if there was much more easier transparency, etc. I think it just facilitates trade in a very big way. And it has to happen at some point, right? It's a kind of obvious thing. But shipping, it makes it very difficult, with all the nuances. So I really like this idea that standardization is actually an innovation need. It's a foundation for innovation.
It is. And I mean, your points is exactly echoed by the software manufacturers we have in our consortium. The big problem they see in developing these new systems to simplify the life of seafarers and ports alike is that it's too expensive. Every port is different, every ship is different, so you have to do a lot of engineering, and the cost goes up, and it's very difficult to scale. And another problem that is, in my opinion, under-communicated is that the shipping sector is very small. I mean, we have been in this business for some years, and there are, they say it's about 110,000 ships in international trade bigger than 100 gross tons. It's nothing. I mean, we really have to cooperate here. In the mobile phone industry, we have 7 billion mobile phones on 2 operating systems. So innovation comes by itself, and you can use kind of this natural development process. But in the maritime industry, we are extremely dependent on explicit cooperation between the stakeholders so that we can develop standards.
A beautiful point, and very well illustrated by comparing the mobile industry as well. Though they're very different from a standards perspective, it's kind of the principles can apply. So again, we're very short of time, but I'd like to throw one or two more questions. But it also merits the big question that, do we want just in time? This is the thing, because it almost looks like the self-interest, the misaligned incentives, the effort that it takes to change, and especially the early adopters really face a lot of the challenges first, to smoothen out everything. So this is where initiatives like Dynaport, again, funded by the EU, is very important. But it's a long road ahead with a lot of bumps, right? So let's end on a maybe positive note, and also the future of the industry as you see it. And we didn't get a chance at all to talk about autonomous ships and really your depth of knowledge there. Maybe we can have a follow-up webinar at some point with you if you're available on that particular topic. But tell me about the future of the industry, right? So how do you see this for current stakeholders, ship owners, all the different stakeholders, the ports, etc.? How do you see just in time the change, the effect of that change? And then if I'm a new professional joining the industry, because these webinars are watched also by young people, in different places, what should they be thinking about? How should they be preparing their careers going forward? Any thoughts, any wisdom you can share from your experience?
It was a big question. I say just time is just one piece of the puzzle, because in general what we see is that digitalization in the shipping industry and the port industry is actually increasing quite rapidly. And without going into details of that, I think it's an extremely promising future there. As I said initially, 80–90% of world trade is dependent on shipping. They will not go away. Decarbonization of the world will require ships. We have to transport things between continents. I mean, ships are so efficient in transporting stuff. It's in Norway, we are making aluminum from alumina from South Africa. And in terms of energy, it makes sense, because we use very little energy, oil, transporting the ore, but we can use hydroelectric power here to make the aluminum from the ore. And I think we will really have to think about this in the future. We will have less transport of unnecessary stuff, but we may get more transport of stuff that requires energy for refinement. It's very difficult to move energy, but the final product is much easier to move. So ships will be here in the future, and it may even play a bigger role than we see today. So that's one thing. And digitalization is coming, and I think the focus now on sustainability, greenhouse gas reduction, and stuff like that will really drive all the industries actually towards more efficiency, more automation, more digitalization, more autonomy for that matter. And it's a fantastically interesting industry. I never regretted going from medical industry to shipping. Medical is extremely important. It saves lives and stuff like that. But shipping is, it's challenging. It takes time, and you really have to be prepared to work with it. But it's so many different components that has to work together to solve the problems we are facing. So it's really fascinating. And as I said, it's a relatively small business internationally. So when you go into it, you go into a relatively small community with people knowing each other, talking to each other. So no, I really want to encourage anyone to put their efforts into this industry. Essential for world trade, essential for world economics.
Wow. On that beautiful note, I'd actually not get into a few other comments that have come in. So there is a comment from Yasmin again, or rather a question from Yasmin regarding whether this would apply to archipelagic countries, so small island countries, etc. And you can take that response later, Ørnulf. And also Captain Abhishek Nair is, I think, asking a rhetorical question, because what he's saying is these discussions have happened for decades. Tech is much more fast and advanced, so how can we catch up? And that's really the open question here. That's why these initiatives are there. But some big changes do require time and patience, right? And so I echo what Ørnulf said, that this industry is super exciting. It has a lot of obviously challenges which will be overcome. And I think we just need to keep chugging away. It does move a lot of the materials that we use for the benefit of other things in society. So it has a very big social impact. I've been a seafarer myself and often not recognize the impact I'm having. We undervalue ourselves sometimes. So please don't do that. And again, thanks to all the participants, very active on the question and answers as well on this occasion. And please send us your comments, send us your other themes that you would be interested in. Plus, this webinar will be available later for, it's recorded and it'll be available. You can share it with anyone else who may have an interest on this topic. So with that, I'll close and really thank you, Ørnulf, for shedding light on so many different topics. It's a long road ahead. Also, we didn't touch many topics that I know you can again add a lot of wisdom. So don't be surprised if we pull you back in one of the future sessions, okay? But thank you so much. It's been fun and also very interactive.
Thank you for having me. It has been a pleasure. And if anyone has questions, feel free to contact me.
Excellent. So I'm going to pass it back to Isabel in the studio. So Isabel, back to you for the closing. And again, thank you, everyone.
So thank you very much for joining us today, all of you. We hope you found this session valuable. And before we say goodbye, we would like to remind you that we publish all our events and news on Navozyme's LinkedIn. So you can scan this QR code that is on screen and follow us. Okay, so you don't miss any updates. And we look forward to seeing you again at our next webinar. Thank you and have a great day.